Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 870. My opponent started off with e4 and I played knight f6, the Alekhine's defense. And he pushed on with e5, that's the main move there. Go knight d5. So we follow the main line for a few moves here. d4, I play d6, just immediately going to counter what's going on in the center. And also, when this knight comes out, it can frequently put more pressure on this pawn here, and sometimes it can use one of these two squares as a landing spot. So, but it's important to get this d6 move in right away. So white played with c4, kicking the knight. That's also the way I play, but knight f3 is another way you can play. It's a flexible waiting move where you can actually follow up with c4 later, or other ways to play as well. You can just keep the pawns there and just keep developing with pieces. Anyway, c4. I think this is a good way. Cancel that. This is a good way for white to play, and the way I play myself. So the knight hops back here, and then white takes. The other option here is to play the four pawns attack with f4, but that is a little bit loosening to the king side. So white has to be pretty careful when playing that way. But f4 is kind of the most aggressive way to play. I tried playing that way myself, and I found out I got into trouble as white generally, so I switched to playing this way with e takes d6. Anyway, with the black pieces, I've lately been experimenting with c takes, taking back with the c pawn. Previously, I used to play e takes. But there's some logic to c takes. Opens up the c file and maybe prepares e5 in some cases. And now it seems like knight c3 is the main move here. My opponent went knight f3. And well, it looks like we're leaving the opening book for a little bit. But we actually stay in the opening book for quite a while. It's just that in this position, g6 is the most common move. And I think having looked at the line, did I follow this for a little bit? Yeah. It looks like this is a decent position for black. So I think I would go with this g6 move. You play g6 here. Plays h3 now, I suppose, to stop the pin. Bishop g7. Anyway, I'm just going to show the main moves. Knight c3, castles, bishop e2, and knight to c6. It looks like a pretty comfortable position for black. You get all your pieces out. This looks like a nice piece on this diagonal. The knight and the bishop are coordinating with pressure on the d-pawn. And if this knight ever gets pushed away, for example, if white plays d5 at some point, the knight can hop over here to e4, supported by the bishop. So I think that's quite a reasonable way to play. I think I'll try that next time. But in the game, I played bishop g4 here. It's also pretty reasonable. I want to get the bishop outside the pawn chain before committing the e-pawn, which might want to go to e6. Let's see. So he played bishop e2. I went knight c6. Maybe e6 needed to be played first, because here he could have played d5. It would have been maybe a little bit awkward for me. Yeah, I looked at this a little bit. He pushes on with d5. My idea was to take here. And then if he takes my knight, then I can take back, and this is pretty reasonable, although it's even better to take here first, kick that rook, and then take the pawn. And it seems like black is just better in those lines. So after d5, bishop takes f3, white should retake with the bishop, and then I get the square for the knight. And I thought that would be okay for me. Let's see, he could also have taken with the pawn, is an interesting suggestion. But the chess engine likes white here, so it thinks that, well, just dropping back with the bishop, I can play g6 now to develop. And I mean, I think this looks okay. I still have ideas here. This bishop looks like it's going to get an open diagonal. This rook can come over here, maybe put some pressure on the c-pawn. Maybe I'm a bit behind in development. White can castle right away, and I'm still a move away from castling. But I think this should still be okay for black. But I have to say the opening book and the chess engine don't agree. They like white quite a bit there. Let's see. That's after knight c6. So instead of knight c6 right away, maybe playing e6 first is the better thing to do. That slows down that d5 push. Anyway, I went knight c6, and he didn't try and challenge that with d5, but he just castled. And you can see we're still we still haven't left the opening book here. I went e6, and you can see we're back in the opening book. I was also in this position wondering about during the game if I could get away with e5. Seems like it is playable, although maybe e6 is a little better. So taking doesn't seem to lead to anything, which is what I was worried about. I was worried that white could take here and open things up, and with my king still in the center, I might get into trouble. But the way that the computer would play this for white is develop this bishop. So I go ahead and get rid of this knight here and play knight takes c4. This actually wins a pawn, but lands black in some trouble here. So bishop takes c6, b takes c6, queen c2. So I guess it's an example of how you can get into trouble if you get a little too aggressive in this kind of position. Let's see, d5 to support the knight, and knight d2. And even though I'm still a pawn up, I'm in a bit of trouble here. He's got pressure here. He's got the possibility of taking this pawn here. If the knight moves away, this pawn on c6 is weak. So white, even though white is a pawn down, white has an excellent position here. So I would avoid that. But after e5, bishop e3 takes. I don't have to take the pawn on c4. I can keep playing in a more restrained fashion. Maybe it's still okay. Anyway, I went with e6, so probably the better of the two. The engine slightly prefers e6 over e5. Let's see, he went b3, bishop b7, so we get some normal development here. He gets his knight out, I get castled, and he plays h3. And at this point, we've actually been following a book line up to this point. We're still in the book. Bishop to e3 is the move at this point. So at this point, when he plays h3, we're finally out of the opening book. And let's see, I decided to go ahead and take here. It seems to be okay. I checked it out with the chess engine. It just, gives this knight some possibility of coming into the center by getting rid of that opposing knight on f3 there. So then I went with e5 right away. The chess engine actually prefers d5 here. Kind of an interesting and different way to play. If he takes, I have enough force to hold a pawn on the d5 square, and we'd have this kind of ram structure here with the two pawns opposing each other. The other option white has here is to push the c pawn forward and kick my knight back, and I would have to route it around. But both of those seem playable for both sides. e5, so maybe a little riskier for black. Gives white a bit more of an edge. And he went with d5. Once again, this idea of knight e2, just dropping back and kind of defending the center with the knight and keeping lines open for the bishops. This seems to be good for white. I could play something like rook e8 here. Now he could push on with d5. And now I don't have such a great square for my knight. The knight could run out to b4 perhaps, but it's going to get kicked around. So yeah, it looks like that's a decent line for white there. Let's see. So I went e5. He went d5 immediately without moving the knight, and now I have this good square on d4 for my knight. And I think I'm doing fine here. He goes bishop e3 to harass my knight. So I trade it for the bishop, and then start bringing this knight over to the king side. It's one of the things you often have to do in the Alekhine's defense is reposition this knight that's sitting over here on b6, where it got chased in the opening. Let's see, he went a4, and I went a5. So a5 maybe was not the best move here, although it was okay. But I had a stronger idea here. If I hadn't been thinking about the queen side and started thinking about the king side a little bit, f5 is good right at this particular moment. Actually gives black a slight edge. There's ideas like bishop f6 with the pawn coming forward with the double attack along the diagonal and hitting the queen. And there's also ideas of pushing the f-pawn forward and kicking back that bishop. So, and just, gaining space on the king side. I could maybe break my knight in. So a bunch of different ways it could continue from here, but it's just grabbing more space on the king side. It looks like a interesting way to play and good for black. So a5, I was trying to secure the square for my knight. I was looking at the weakness on b3, but it seems like that's not the most relevant side of the board at this point in the game. Let's see, he went knight b5. kind of tickling this d pawn, although it's adequately defended at the moment. It does kind of keep my pieces tied down. I went rook c8. I was still thinking of, putting a knight here. Didn't want to necessarily have to take back with a pawn. He went queen to g3, so looking maybe at bringing the bishop in here to h6, and perhaps winning some material. I guess I could defend against that with bishop to f3, but that would leave bishop f6, but that would leave the d6 pawn hanging. So I have to be a little bit careful. Once again, f5 is the recommended move here. This would allow me to defend with the rook, a very convenient defense, and it also threatens the fork. But anyway, I played rook e8. Yeah, I just wasn't thinking of this f5 idea. It's something to keep in mind in the future. And he goes f4, and this seems to be pretty good for white. Let's see, I didn't take right away. I played knight to c5, hitting this pawn, and he defended. It seems like white can get an advantage here by taking. There's some tactics here that I missed out on. But when I take back, he can push this pawn forward, and that's pretty annoying. If I take, I guess he can pin the bishop, so that can get me into trouble. Bishop to f6 is the line, and then rook a to d1 anyway, threatening to push this pawn forward. Now I can blockade with the knight, so I'm not losing material here, but my pieces are getting tied up, and white has a big space advantage in this position, so it's actually quite good for white. So that's why I should have played a little more aggressively here with that f5 move. So rook e8 and knight c5. That combination got me into some big trouble. But fortunately, just defended this pawn here. Got my bishop to f6, and the game continues just with a slight edge to white. I tried poking with my bishop here, kicking the queen around. The queen went to f3 and e4. I wanted to get in the c4 move and maybe get a square for my knight here. My original idea was to get my bishop to this square, and I am going to eventually get there, but it'll take a while. He went queen e2. He could have gone queen to f4, and I was planning to play rook e5 here, but actually this doesn't work, because after knight takes d6, my queen is overloaded. My queen was defending that pawn, but it was also defending the bishop. So he can just grab that pawn. I should probably retreat my bishop here. But he is hitting the rook. So this is actually winning material for white. So queen to f4 would have been a good move here. And I would have been struggling to find a response. Might have gotten into trouble. But he stepped back with his queen. Let's see, I brought my bishop back, so it's no longer a target over there on h4. He played g4. I went bishop e5. That was my intent, was to get the bishop to e5, so I've managed to accomplish my plan. Let's see, he brought his king forward with king g2, maybe trying to protect some of these dark squares here. But right here actually would have been a good time to play the move g5. I think I mentioned that. It would prevent my queen from coming into this side, and it's actually funny that white would be a little more secure pushing that pawn forward, but it's well supported by the bishop, and it keeps my pieces out. So it seems like that's the best choice there. He went king g2, went knight d3, hopped my knight into this square. Went queen d2. Yeah, I was kind of floundering a little bit here. I was looking for a plan and not really finding it. Went with this queen h4 move. Went bishop f2. And then right here, I decided to trade. And that actually is the turning point of the game, where I'm really in pretty big trouble after that, and white plays it pretty well. So if I were to just drop my queen back to f6 and continue in this position, the material is even. I'm still holding on to this advanced pawn here, which may become a factor at some point, and I've got a knight over here. He's got a knight which is a bit out of play. The chess engine rates this as absolutely even, so 0, 0, 0 here. So maybe it's just a kind of difficult position where it's difficult for either side to make progress. But anyway, that's the way to stay in the game, basically. So I went for these trades, and even here it'd be better retreating the queen, but I didn't want to retreat at this point. But after these trades, this is a good in-game for white. The problem is that I didn't foresee is that it's easy for white to put pressure on that pawn, and it's difficult for me to defend it. So even though I've got a passed pawn in the endgame, and he doesn't, which is normally an advantage, in this particular case, he can round that pawn up, and white is just winning after this. And he plays this part well. So let's see, I was defending my d pawn there so that my bishop would be free to move. He starts attacking my pawn. I drop the bishop back, but you can see that he's able to win that pawn. He's just a pawn up here. And I thought, well, if I can stay active with my pieces, maybe I can hold this. But white really keeps an advantage all through this. And because it was a long game, I'm not going through all of this in any great detail. I did manage to get my rook active, so I think this was a decent plan by black. But already I was in trouble here. Well, ever since that exchange and going to the endgame, I've been in trouble, and white's advantage has been slowly increasing, and now he's got this very dangerous passed pawn here. So I went for the check. His king came forward, and I get one more check, but driving his king forward was probably not such a great idea, and I even gave one more check, which brought his king forward even further. You know, I was trying to chase the king away so I could get something going with these pawns, but my pawns are all blockaded, so it's actually not happening. it's not leading to anything good for me. So rather than giving one more check, the chess engine says, well, king f8 maybe is my best try, but still winning for white. Anyway, I went with this check. His king comes forward. Let's see, I dropped my bishop out of the way. There's one more point I wanted to show. He went king d7, and I moved my king here, walking into this fork. But at this point, I could have tried c7. This is an idea I still had on the position, using my rook and my bishop to prevent this pawn from coming forward, and also attacking his rook at the same time. But with a careful series of moves, white can get out of trouble here and win this game. So just to show you how to win this endgame, first you move the rook with tempo. So you move the rook to a light square where the bishop can't attack it, and you hit my bishop. So the bishop has to move out of the way. And then you move the knight with tempo, hitting my rook. The rook drops back, staying behind the pawn. And then the knight comes over here to this d6 square, blocking the bishop. And now there's nothing to stop this pawn from coming through. And that's just a clean win for white. So anyway, this is at the point in the game where we're low on time, and I, I'm just making blunders right and left. But so is my opponent. So I guess this is the stage of the Blitz game where you just have to be lucky or just spot one more tactic than your opponent, basically. But king g7 was horrible because he could have played knight to e6 there, forking the king and the rook, but instead, well, he was focused on this queening this pawn, which is also just winning. So I could have resigned in this position with a clean conscience, because I'm going to have to move my king away from the fork, and he's going to queen anyway. But I kicked his knight. I kicked his rook. He moved the rook with check, and then he queened. So this is also a position where I could resign with a clear conscience. But anyway, I played on, and I'm not going to comment anymore on all the blunders, but just goes to show that there's the time element is really critical in these Blitz games, and being able to find moves when you're out of time is important, and I managed to find the checkmate. Anyway, so a funny end to that game, but white really played well up to that point, particularly this endgame section. After I gave white a better endgame, he did a good job of converting it, and then just got low on time and started blundering there. Anyway, interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you later. Bye.